short. Hi, it's Charlie Seymour Jr., and I invite you to watch this interview. This is going to be with Tom and Chris. You're going to get to know them. You're going to get to know what their firm has done. You're going to get to know what their thought was to rebuild the inside part of Swarthmore Presbyterian Church. It was done with a lot of care and a lot of love, and you're going to see that right here.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Why don't we start off? Tell me a little bit about your backgrounds, where you grew up, where you went to school, when you first thought about being an architect.
I was born in Poughkeepsie, New York, although I don't remember that. I spent most of my youth growing up in Elkins Park, just north of Philadelphia. And I realized I wanted to be an architect when I did a report on Frank Lloyd Wright in 3rd grade.
Wow.
And my father took me to see Beth Shalom Synagogue, which is in Elkins Park, that was Frank Lloyd Wright's last building.
Yeah.
And it's a magnificent space. And he explained to me that everything that I was looking at, someone designed. And it was the first time I came to the realization that you just didn't go buy things, that someone actually designed everything we're in contact with.
And we say you have to design it like 3 times, right? Once in your brain, once on paper or in the computer, and then once as it's going up, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Chris, how about you? A little bit on your background and what made you think to become an architect?
Well, I grew up in Lebanon, Pennsylvania, which is a fairly rural area. As I was growing up, my parents built their own house when I was about maybe in 8th grade, 6th to 8th grade, around there. And I was enamored with the idea that somebody drew something on the piece of paper and they knew what it looked like before it was being built. And I just remember looking at the drawings and the elevations. I was like looking at them, and they looked exactly like the building was going to be. And I thought that was pretty cool thing. And I was close enough to the house that we lived in while it was being built. I could ride my bike over during the summertime. I was old enough that I could, go out on my own, and I would go over there and just watch them build it all day. And so that just got me interested in it. And then I was always drawing when I was in school, but I never really took a lot of art classes. And then as I graduated high school, I was enamored with getting out of the rural area and going to an urban area. And that's when I went to Temple University for architecture. And I spent 2 summers. I came back, and then after that I kind of stayed in Philadelphia.
Now, you guys are different enough in age. You started probably on computer when you were taking architecture classes. Tom, you were probably doing hand drawing, or were you doing hand drawing as well?
No, we were doing a lot of the computer was just starting to come into fashion at that point.
You are older than you look.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I learned on computers when I was in grade school and middle school and high school, but it really hadn't entered into architecture quite so much at that point.
And Tom, how about for you? Was it difficult when computers came in to get involved with them?
Yes. It still is difficult. I am not a computer person. I still draw by hand.
And do a lot of conceptual things that others turn into those full building plans?
Sketch and draw, critique.
Okay. Tell me about your firm. There are 2 named partners, so tell me a little bit about that, if you would, the size of your staff, the type of work you specialize, some of your favorite projects over the years. Give us a little history on that. You've been there for a little while.
Well, our firm was founded by Samuel Crothers, who is someone familiar to this congregation because he was my mentor, and my first major project out of school was working on the fellowship hall. The firm, Daley Jalboot and I worked for Sam, and we became junior partners. And Sam retired at the age of 72. So we're a successor firm. The firm fluctuates in size between 8 and 12.
8 and 12 architects?
Architects. We do only institutional work. We do churches, public schools, private schools, and college work. And we've done, the Presbyterians have been very good to us. We've worked here several times. We've worked for the Doylestown Presbyterian Church twice. The Westminster Presbyterian Church in Westchester, we've done 2 phases of work there. We're now working on a Methodist church in Newark, Delaware. We always have several public school projects and several church projects in the office at any given time.
When did you first work with Swarthmore Presbyterian Church, and what was that first project? I believe I know, but why don't you tell us?
The first project I worked on was the Fellowship Hall addition in 1980. We started in 82 and it was finished in 84. I remember that because my son was born the year it was completed.
Who was the senior, if that's the right term, architect on that project?
Sam Crothers was the partner in charge, and I was the project architect. So when we came back to do this project, there were many times when during this project I realized that I am now Sam, and that it continues, that the tradition of a small architectural firm of mentoring and developing projects, and much of the Fellowship Hall was pushing the design, with Sam saying, "You're really sure you want to do that?" And now that role is really turned, and Chris is very much the driving force behind this project, and I'm the gray-haired one that says, "You're sure you really want to do that?"
If I hear this correctly, Chris, he's ready to be moved out of the way for you to step up and become the named partner. Maybe I misunderstood that slightly, but tell me the difference in what the two of you have done on this project, since we've just heard how, the project architect in charge versus the one who's really pushing design and that sort of thing.
He's familiar with what we have to do in the overall vision and how it has to. He's involved with the checks and balances, so to speak, where he knows what we have to do. I do too, but it's always good to have those two minds thinking about that. So you know what the drive of the project is. More things about, where the line of a certain wall is going to hit, or I know the detail of the door exactly, or I know in the basement, in the catacombs down there, where the foundation was and where it's not and where it needs to be and why it wasn't there.
I spent very little time crawling around in the basement.
Well, and Chris was here when the concrete was being poured too, underneath where you're sitting, so he
Correct.
knows all those details.
Chris spent a lot of time crawling around in the basement and looking in attics and finding all of the interesting past constructions. Part of this project involved archaeology of what was here.
Yes.
And it's the foundations where it reveals itself. Because you can take walls out up here, you'll take walls out, but you're not going to take out foundations very easily. So you can see where the old edge of the church used to be, where it got added on to, that there's different levels down there. And, now that it's all nice down there underneath, now I want to crawl around down there because it's nice, Yeah, it's... Yeah. I want to spend time down there now because I spent enough time down there when it was little alleyways of dirt and plastic sheathing.
Let me say this, because this is a real eye-opener for me. I've been around architects a good bit of my life. My wife does computer-aided design for a large firm. But until I was on this project, I really didn't know the extent to which the architects were involved. I mean, I knew we did pretty little plans and drawings. I knew we did as-built, but I didn't realize that you really run the project from the beginning, and all the way through it. So can you share with us a timeline for a project? When you're first called in, how you win the assignment, when you start to draw the plans, your responsibilities during construction?
A typical project, and there are things about this project that aren't typical, but the timeline is fairly typical. The committee, there was an architectural selection committee that interviewed architects, and we were fortunate enough to be chosen based on the work we had done here before and other projects. And generally, the planning to get to the point where you're ready to select a contractor, if it moves quickly, that's a year. because the first thing is to develop what are the problems that we're solving. So the first stage of any project is establishing the goals and objectives of the project after everyone identifies what the problems were. There was a really good steering committee, I'll call it, who had done much of that work and established goals going in. We spent time so that we fully understood those issues. And then we began the design process that was schematic, many diagrams. We looked at various solutions to the problems. Some were warmly received, some were not. That's part of the process. And then when we all agreed on what the plan was, then we develop a set of construction and bidding documents. And in this case, that took us 4 or 5 months to do those documents because we were dealing with trying to use existing elements. It involved a great deal of time here surveying, measuring, looking at paneling. Can we reuse it? Where would we use it?
When you talk about paneling, you're talking about the wood paneling that's behind you
wood
up
paneling.
here right now. A lot was reused, but there's a lot new that matches perfectly up here now.
Yes, we're very pleased with that. So from a timeline and then the construction, the contractor started off thinking that the project would take 6 months for them to do the work, although we had originally scheduled the project for 8 months. And I think we're right at about 8 months because it's not the kind of project that you can put 10 workers on to make it take less time because of space constraints. So I don't, is it 3 years we've been doing this?
More than that. I think we have drawings that dated back to 2008, I think.
On this project, 2008.
Yes. Because it went through, the early investigation just involves meeting with everybody, interviewing the choir, interviewing the pastors, interviewing the sexton, interviewing, who else? Anyone, the worship committee.
We had a congregational event where we held a concept day and we asked for everyone's input. And we made all the architecture.
And I'm going to take credit for all those good things they used, as I drew them out on newspaper and I gave them to them. So,
right.
Yeah, it was a fun day. It really was. I thought it was very inventive of you to do that. Do you always do a thing like that?
We try to always do that with church projects because we want the congregation at the end of the project to feel as though they were part of the project. Because when we're done, this is your church. We feel very vested in this project, but ultimately this is your worship space. And one of our goals as a firm is always to make the project be what the client's goals were are fulfilled, as opposed to the architect who imposes their will on the client.
Well, and I found in that day, as I'm there drawing things down on newspaper to try to make some ideas happen here, of all the things that I kept thinking about that as I started drawing, I thought, no, that can't work. So we work it out for the congregant, the people in the congregation too, of they have some grandiose ideas, but wait a minute, when I try those, they don't work. Right? So that may be a benefit to you at that point as well.
Well, that's a microcosm of what the design process is, because the design process is a process of elimination. It's not you draw something and you find the answer. It doesn't come like that. It's you draw something and something works, something doesn't. So you focus on, you throw away what doesn't and you keep what's good. Then you move on to the next step. Then you find more things that are wrong as you develop it more. So you have to know what you don't like and what doesn't work in order to know what works. Just like a kid, a kid knows what they're doing when they're right because they've been told when they did something that was wrong. Yes. So it's the design process is the same, similar.
Well, and for months now, I know I've been a guest to it just so I would know what was going on, so I could be prepared for some of the video activities going on here. You've had construction meetings here in the church every other week on Wednesdays. You always have something like that? You're there once a week, is that right?
Yes.
And then you have meetings with others there, and you're there talking with the contractor to make sure things are going the way they were drawn or answering their questions. But then you have meetings with people to just bring everybody up to date, get their input. Is that what you normally would do? That's part of the timeline. I didn't realize that was going on.
We typically have a construction job meeting every other week, and that the contractor's present and the owner's representatives are present, and we're present. And we bring up every issue that there is. Construction, there are always problems. My mentor always said they were opportunities to be positive, and it is true. Things are uncovered, and you need to be actively involved in developing the solution to the problem.
And literally uncovered when you're doing a rehab here, a reconstruction of something, right?
Yes, we found, we weren't really sure what was underneath the floor of the very bottom of the former organ loft. Most of the pipes were below the floor when the project started, so we weren't really sure what was underneath, whether it was dirt or concrete or there was a wood floor that was on top of something. So that was one of the things that we uncovered. And we discovered that some of the stone foundations were not in a condition that we could leave them. We knew that some of those issues were there, but that scope of work expanded a little as we did the foundation work.
As we sit here near the end of October 2012, and the project is not completed, but it's very close. We can see here the organ will not be in for several months. That's part of what the plan was. What's left for you two and your firm to do here at this point?
Well, we have what we call the punch list left to do. When the contractor is completely done, has everything up, all doors hung, everything painted, we'll come through and we'll do our last review with them, or we'll go through our last review where we'll pick things up that they may have missed or just may need to be fixed, or maybe somebody came along and dinged the wall afterwards and we have to fix it. But the punch list that we do at the end, for a project like this, and for most of our projects, we're actually punch listing almost every week that we're out here.
You come in here for a meeting, you see some things, you put it down, you ask them to make sure
right.
it's okay.
I mean, so we do that. So we basically do a punch list almost every week. We don't necessarily quantify it like we do the final punch list, but we'll be working with them and seeing what needs to be done, what needs to get fixed, and say, they might have a problem that needs to be addressed because it was different. They may have done something that was different, and you address it and you try to get things to move forward. So after the punch list, it's basically, come to the opening on the 18th and enjoy it.
Come to the big opening and see what's going on. I'll be sure to have a camera running when the opening is there. Now, Tom, you sort of mentioned this, and I didn't pursue this line at that point because I knew it was my next question coming up, so I wanted to get to this. Clearly, in a congregation, to decide to take actions, they have a couple of reasons why they bring you in. Things aren't working well, things are falling apart, they're growing, they're shrinking. What were the top 3 to 5 goals of this project? The
original chancel was a split chancel.
What do you mean by split chancel?
The choir was very Anglican. And the choir was divided in the left and the right. I was raised an Episcopalian, so the gospel side and the epistle side, we would call it. But so the choir was split, which they basically would sing facing each other. So much of the sound was in this choir loft. The sight lines and the visibility for all of the activities that were happening on the platform weren't very good. The pulpit was on this side, and so that it was centered on 1/3 of the space. In the new layout, the pulpit is to my left, and actually, because this church was expanded at one point with a side aisle, the pulpit now is roughly in the center of the congregation.
Right, so it's not based on the center aisle, it's based
That's
on
correct.
the center of the entire space at this point.
So now when a person is preaching in the pulpit, the sight lines for everyone in the space is greatly improved. The other thing that happened was that the platform was pulled forward out into the room so that the large transept seating was really, they couldn't see most of what happened on the platform because the front of the platform was in line with the side of the transept. So we created more space. The goal was to have the choir sing into the direction of the nave of the congregation.
Bring the organist out in front.
Bring the organist out front so that they could actually see the organist. At one point, most churches, the organist was not the person that directed the choir. That has really changed.
And that was here for many, many years.
Many years. So for most churches in the last decade, that's no longer the case. So that having the organ console in a place where the choir can actually see the organist who's directing the choir was one of the charges. So the choir, the organ console will be located directly behind the screen wall here and the three chairs.
And then we have a brand new sound system throughout as well, which is going to be finalized this next week or so.
Right.
You talked about some of the challenges involved. This congregation is about 117 years old, if my math is correct. What were some of the challenges that you found in this historical space where the congregation values the existing details and features? Chris?
It was about looking at the specific character of the space, the arts and crafts style that the original church was done in, and the style that the chancel was done in, and just to try to maintain that character. Obviously, we changed things completely. You know, it grew. You know, we loosened up the pieces of furniture to make it flexible. That was one of the big demands. If you were saying one of the 5 things that were that are the goals, flexibility was one of them.
So we can literally move these now if we have to. They're not. I mean, they're not easy, but you can move them, right?
They can move. So it's just the general constraint of reusing the existing wood, and then how far do you take reusing some of these pieces? At what expense do you do that? Because we could spend hundreds of thousands of dollars and reuse almost every inch of wood, but it doesn't make sense, you know. So the biggest challenge was, how do you take the existing character and balance it with sensibility of reuse?
We had many people say to us that were members of the congregation in the early stages, whatever you do, don't ruin our church.
Right.
I mean, that you know, and there are many examples that we've all been to where you go into buildings and you say, what did they do?
Yeah.
How could they have done that? We really worked hard to reuse as many of the elements as we could in, as Chris said, in an appropriate way, so that there's a visual logic to the end result. And in many ways, it's hard to know what was original and what was reused. And some of the pieces were repurposed in different ways. The old modesty screens are now used as the stands, and we reused the paneling that used to be on the sides. We've reused that paneling.
The chairs behind you used to be all the way up
all
by
the
the
way in
organ.
the back, and the lectern is a reworking of the old built-in lectern.
It's about twice the size, isn't it? I mean, in depth or not? Is it?
Yes.
Roughly.
Yeah.
Yes, it is deeper.
Yep.
That was a challenge. How do we make this so that it's a freestanding element that doesn't fall over?
Yes.
Because
and
it
the
was
pulpit.
a very thin element before because it was built into a wall, so it could be it was very shallow.
Right.
But once it becomes a freestanding piece, then you've got to figure out how to maintain the piece and widen it.
And the steps that come out the back of the pulpit are just sitting there. They come off, and there's a crank under there, and wheels lower down, and you can wheel the pulpit anywhere you would like on the platform.
Now, I don't know if I have this correct, but I think it was a quote from you, because Dick Wolschlager, the pastor here, has used it several times, that we wanted people to come in here and see that it was new but familiar. It's for Chris.
I think that's Chris's.
We'll change that over to Chris. Please give Chris that benefit. That was his idea. And I think that's what we're going to see here, right? I mean, we've got very similar feels, certainly out in the nave, in the main part of the congregation. You've got the richness of the wood that was here before, with some more room to move around, and the choir has more room and can face out.
Yeah, from the center aisle, I mean, if you were to take a snapshot, a vignette of what the center aisle, what the view from the center aisle used to be, just focusing on the table and the backdrop, really that viewpoint really hasn't changed. You're still going to have the table, center aisle, you're going to have the cross sitting on it, and you're going to have these clergy chairs sitting behind it. It's a little bit shallower here now than it was, and you probably had choir sitting in these chairs, in the previous arrangement. But that's the original intent of that layout was, to have that. So, there are vignettes. If you were to, take closer shots of this, if you were to compare old pictures and new pictures, they'd be very similar, because there's little bits and pieces everywhere. It's just that those little bits and pieces are in different orders now.
And you've opened up here where the organ will be, and we will see pipes in there. You've taken the arch, you've taken the plaster out from up there, and have an absolutely gorgeous look up there now. And I know that had its own challenges, because I was here a couple of days when we were wondering how those were going to stay up there. But you've figured it out.
Yes, when we knew that the back of this main arch wasn't finished.
And never had a back piece, and I don't know if many people actually realized it. It was just a bottom piece and a front piece, and it was hollow in the back.
So it wasn't a complete structure the way all the other arches in the nave are. So when we started to take the plaster out, we did it in a whole series of steps, because we weren't really sure whether if we took all of that out, whether the arch would stay. And the contractor shored it with posts during the removal process to make sure. So we kept peeling away layers, and I think in 1 week we came out 3 times to see what was under each layer. And we found out that we did do some little remedial structural work to comfort ourselves that the arch will be there when we're all no longer here for generations and generations. So, but that was one of the challenges. And one of the other challenges was that when we took the old, hopefully people will remember, but there used to be the speaker cloth white arch that was the facade.
That was on a reconstruction.
Right.
It used to be all solid back there, and then they did that. You're right.
And it went through, and then there were pipes in the middle that were visible, but most of the pipes were not. The choice was made in the design that all of that would go away, and we would really expose the whole pipe organ that is the upper part of the organ, and the organ designer has moved the majority of the pipes up so that you will see them. So that the empty space up in there now, when we come back in January or February when they're done, that will all be filled in with pipes.
So it'll be a glorious view and sound coming from there.
Right. But when we opened that up, we found out that even with all the measurements that we took, the relationship between the old organ facade and the arch that's right in front of it was about twice the distance that we figured it would be. And so we ended up modifying all of the millwork that makes the pointed arch, almost the beams that define that upper edge of the organ loft. That all was redesigned during construction.
Well, the outside of the roof lines up. That roof over the organ chamber lines up with the roof over the chancel, and it's completely straight on the outside. But when you come to the inside, the chancel is up here, and the organ roof was actually at a different angle. So they built the organ roof, and then they realized they had the wrong pitch, and then they shimmed it to make the outside meet, but the inside never did. So the inside is dropped down about 7 inches at the top and goes down to 0 at the sides. So you got this something that goes to 0 and then 7 inches to the top. So
and that's how it is now?
But that's how it is now, beneath that.
But
we didn't.
It's not, you can't perceive that
No.
because we adjusted the millwork on the backside.
Yes.
So.
The chevron with the wood there, too, is really beautiful. It's a nice detail, and it kind of mirrors what's going on over in the chapel as well, where the ceiling area up there has a chevron of the way the wood is there.
It's a classic restoration detail that you see happen. Once you notice it once, you'll go to other buildings and you'll see it repeated that way, because it's hard to put new decking against decking in the same direction.
Well, I want people to remember this from years now, that every single one of those was done individually, because I was here to watch a lot of those. That's not just put up as a huge panel. Each board is put up there individually and nailed in place.
And one of the goals was to create a new shell, a new acoustic shell in the chancel, in the choir area, to increase the reflectivity of sound and to help project that sound out. So we added a layer of wood. The original wood decking in the sanctuary has many gaps in between the boards, and the acoustical engineer who reviewed the project said one of your acoustical problems is all of these voids. So we put a new hard surface over this whole area so that more sound will now bounce and go out into the nave.
And acoustics is one of the 5.
What was one of those?
It might even be 2 of the 5.
Yeah, it may have been, and it certainly was one of the driving forces in the beginning, the visual switching around and the acoustics, that's for sure. As we're coming here near the end and your work is really now visible to us, what would you say are some of the features of your final design that you're most pleased with?
In conjunction with the mill workshop and the contractor, I'm just pleased the way that some of these pieces were able to be reused and salvaged in a way that when you look at them, it's not a visible, there's no noticeable scar to it. You can't really see what was done to them. I mean, the way that this thing, we didn't know, even up until the last, I think the project went out to bid. The documents went out to bid, and they were in the contractor's hands, and we still didn't know how we were going to deal with the lectern. We knew that we had what we had to do to it, but we didn't know the details yet. And we came up with some details to do it, and with the mill workshop working on it, they did a great job, and they actually, it was able to be done, and it seems simple on the drawings, but you never know until things come apart, because wood's brittle, it ages over time, it dries out, you never know what you're going to get into. So I think the biggest thing that we're happy with was a lot of the assumptions that we made in the beginning about reusing the wood. Actually, it worked out that way. But it was because we had a very sensitive mill shop that was wanting to reuse the wood, appreciated it and really treated it with the respect it needed to get reused, and appreciated the details in which it was done, because they actually did a lot of detailing and connections and joints in the same traditional manner that it was done in originally, even though there are newer technologies out there that could have speeded the work. They could have used pocket screws, they could have done other things, but they still did mortise and tendons and on some of putting these panels back together. So I think that's the one thing that, overall, there's lots of little things, but I think that's the thing that we're most pleased about, is that it came apart without too many problems. It didn't fall apart in their hands. That was the biggest concern, that it just wasn't going to be able to be reused.
You know, I've gotten to know you over the last several months, and hadn't met you before we started on all of this. And I think what I just saw in your explanation was the little boy inside being pleased that the drawings that he had done came to fruition here.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, the organ screen panels, the carved screens that are in the back, the ones in the middle are original.
Right.
And the ones on the left and the right are new. And someone carved those in the exact same way 100 years ago they were carved.
And we didn't know, that's another thing that we didn't know in the drawings. I mean, there's a lot of things that we can sit here and say we're responsible for, you know, but there's
everything.
Yeah. For the video, we did it all. But, you know, it's without having somebody on the other side, whatever craftsman's working on it, take it as a challenge or take it as something that they want to do. You know, we didn't know if those things were going to be
carved by a computer.
Carved by a computer,
basically.
But the millwork guy said no. He can probably know somebody who does carving, and it will be a better look to it because you'll see the chisel marks. You won't see the perfect machining that comes from a computer control. So a lot of those things, you know, we don't know quite how it's going to be done. That's the means and methods. We know what we want. We try to make the intent as clear as possible. And we've eliminated a bunch of things that could go wrong to say, all right, we've reduced our risk. You know, we know that by looking at it and controlling it and keeping it to a confined area.
We tried to identify logical ways to use the elements so that the ripple effect of using them was controlled. And you know, another example is these three seats were basically spread apart. There
were 5 seats.
There were 5 seats. We reused certain elements. The top is new. So all of those, we knew what our intent was. And I think we really should give credit. The contractor was Caldwell, Heckles, and Egan out of Lancaster, which is a carpentry-driven locale. And they have their own millwork shop, so that the person who made the millwork was not a subcontractor to the general contractor. And much of the work was really supervised by the millwork shop, which is rather unusual. They oversaw the demolition. They brought in the head of the millwork shop, Mike Hyder, was really supervising Josh Heisey, who was the superintendent, in the demolition process of taking all the elements out and wrapping them. And then when he got everything back to his shop, he did a really careful inventory and confirmed what we had documented would really work. And there was a great deal of back and forth between Mike and Chris as to the actual detail of how he was going to reuse certain elements. So all of those things worked. And we were really fortunate. But everyone that's worked on the project, from all of the carpenters, everyone in our office, all of the subcontractors, realized how special this opportunity is. Mike Hyder has said numerous times, you don't get many of these projects. This is, you know, maybe one a decade are you going to get to work on something that has this level of detail, this level of refinement, this level of care. So there's been, it really was a team effort to make it happen. And that really started with the owner, because the owner, it's a demanding client, and that's great. We love to work with demanding clients because they set a level of expectation that you then strive to me. And I think that rippled through every aspect of the project. Everyone brought their best gifts to the development of the design, the development of the details, the execution of the work. So it's been kind of magical.
I can only imagine the pride you must have professionally and personally to see this coming together this way that has been over 4 years, and you've been thinking about it, you've been putting it on the plans, and now you're here in front. So as we're wrapping up, what would you say to the congregation of Swarthmore Presbyterian Church for what you've done here now? We're here in 2012. What about those watching this video now, in 10 years, maybe 50 years from now? What would you want them to know about what has taken place here?
That we tried to be respectful and careful to an existing building that was much beloved.
I would say thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. As I just said before, this is a unique opportunity, and we're very appreciative that we were part of a whole group of people that made this happen.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.